Jesus entered a village, and a woman whose name was Martha welcomed him. Martha and Mary were friends of Jesus. You remember they have a brother as well, Lazarus, who appears in the Gospel of John, famous for another very important reason. Lazarus raised from the dead, but it's Martha and Mary that welcome him. And Martha is taking the lead in this story, isn't she, in terms of the hospitality that's being expressed. And Mary, it seems, is just enjoying Jesus' presence, sitting at his feet. Now, it may be, it doesn't say it in the Gospel, but we can presume that, remember, Jesus also had 12 others traveling with him regularly. So maybe they were kind of hanging around as well. And Martha is quite busy preparing this meal for 15 people, if you count them all. So she's quite actively involved in that, and Mary is really just enjoying the presence of the Lord, seated at his feet, we're told. Now think about Martha really exercising expressing hospitality. It's something that's instinctive, at least it should be in us, when we, particularly if you don't see the context, to welcome Jesus, not just because he's Jesus, but because he's another human being who's hungry and we want to respond to their needs. It's what Abraham manifests in that first reading. Now he's visited in the middle of the desert. He's visited by 3 men who are standing nearby. Now he doesn't realize at that point that these are really messengers to him, angels who are literally bringing a message of God to him, a message of the fulfillment of the promise that God had made to Abraham. But his instinctive response, because he's like one of those in the psalm that we sang, who does justice, who will live in the presence of the Lord, he instinctively says, I have to give them something to eat. This is a very remote place. And he goes and he invites them to do that. They agree to accept, and he hastens to go get Sarah, who's in the tent. And God bless her. It was probably a hot afternoon for her too, but all of a sudden we're having dinner. She's going to start cooking in the tent. And she gets busy with making bread. He goes and gets a servant who slays a calf and prepares it to be cooked and presented. And then he helps too. He does his own thing with curds. And then he brings it to it and he serves it to them under a tree. It's kind of a bucolic scene. It was probably pretty hot. But after they have eaten, they say to him, where's Sarah? And I was thinking, Sarah's probably lying down with her feet up now, had enough of this, relaxing. But he has a message for Sarah too. He says that 1 year from now, I'll come back and she's going to have a son. Now, if you remember the story, that was God's promise to Abraham, that he would be the father of countless descendants. He takes them out and says, look at the stars, and if you can count them, that's how many descendants you will have. But it's getting long, and it's getting late, and it hasn't happened, and they're old, they're elderly. But he gets the message now. A message, if you think about it, that he would not have gotten if he hadn't manifested that just expression of hospitality. I mean, he didn't know at first. He may have suspected that it was somewhat unusual that they would come to him. He may have sensed a certain spirituality about them. But because of his generosity, his expression of this very human quality of hospitality, he gets a very wonderful message. And so does Sarah. It's kind of what Paul is talking about, that we as Christians are all called to a sense of sacrifice, of giving of ourselves, and that through that, as he calls it, sharing in the sufferings of Christ. Sharing in the sufferings of Christ, being one with Jesus in the cross, that somehow that kind of unlocks for us a vision, an understanding, a deeper experience of God's presence. Because Paul continues that this mystery, hidden from ages and from generations past, what we understand to be the mystery of the death and resurrection of Jesus, into which we've all been baptized. But this mystery that was hidden has now been manifested to his holy ones, to whom God chose to make known the riches of the glory of this mystery. In other words, through entering into that mystery and understanding it, and that means sharing in the sufferings of Christ, somehow we are opened up to a vision of the glory of God, of the mystery, the truth of what life is all about and why God has created us. to share his glory forever. And in the same way that Abraham gets a confirmation of what he and Sarah have longed for because of their generosity, of their service. So Martha, back to the scene there in the little town. Martha in Bethany, she's busy being a good Christian, really, before Christians were really named as such. But she's doing that work. She's like Sarah and Abraham, the servant, putting together the meal. And she's very actively engaged in that. Meanwhile, Mary is kind of getting a glimpse of the glory, isn't she? She's seated at the feet of the Lord. Imagine that. Imagine to be in the presence of Jesus as he's speaking. How captivating that must be. You kind of sympathize her. I mean, she didn't want to leave him. Who would? She's getting that glimpse of the glory that Paul talks about. And there's got to be a connection between the two. And there can be. And it really is because Martha takes the initiative to speak up that I think she's opening up to it. And she gets that message from Jesus. Martha's problem is kind of threefold, right? Number one, she's doing all the work. Number two, she's doing it all by herself. And number three, Jesus doesn't seem to care. Now, how often do we feel frustrated? That we feel like we're kind of slugging along all by ourselves, doing it all, carrying it all. I'm sure I can see some nodding heads. Sure, we have those moments. And you know what? God, do you realize what I'm going through? Do you realize what I'm doing? I think I would add another kind of a deeper meaning. Because what Jesus says, he seems to ignore the basic problem. And what does he say to her? He says, Martha, Martha, you're anxious and worried about many things. Now, were those many things, cooking the meat and potatoes? It could be. Making sure that everything was set for this very special guest. It could be, but I think he was going to a deeper experience of anxiousness and worry. Of course, Jesus could see into her heart. He knew what was really agonizing about her. I think it may have been that lack of recognition that she was getting, maybe she was kind of thinking she was sort of being overlooked. That maybe she was feeling passed over and unappreciated. Then this is my baby sister. She gets all the attention. Mary. And I think we can have that sometimes. We can feel like we're pouring ourselves out, we're doing everything we need to do, and nobody cares. And Jesus is basically saying to her, I do care. And I know you at that deeper, more personal level. So you need this experience that Mary's having. And that experience that Mary is having, that's the vision of God for which we've been created. That God has created us to be there in his presence forever. That captivating love, that we can't imagine what that's like. But she's getting a little glimpse of it. Just like Abraham and Sarah got a glimpse of the fulfillment of the promise through their sharing in the suffering, for their sacrifice. And so Jesus is trying to help Martha to make that connection. As Christians, we are invited to both. As Paul says, to truly share in the sufferings of Christ through our generosity, through our sacrifice, through our living the gospel, and living that faithfully, and being people for others. Not always seeking ourselves. We don't always think that by doing that, because a lot of times it does come instinctively, but we don't think about why we're doing that. Somehow that's uniting us more intimately with Christ. And the positive side of that is the glimpse of the glory. As Paul says, but now it has been manifested to his holy ones, to whom God chose to make known the riches of the glory of this mystery. Brothers and sisters, again, every time we come to the Eucharist, we're invited into that moment of sitting with the Lord to glimpse the glory that he truly is present with us in the Blessed Sacrament. That Jesus is there, that he nourishes us and feeds us with his precious body and blood. And he knows that just like he reads into Martha's heart, he knows, he can see she's anxious and worried about many things. So he knows in each one of us, he knows what we're anxious about, what we're worried about, what we're afraid of, what we're struggling with, how we're feeling. And he says, come to know the promise that goes with that struggle. The promise of my love for you. It's unconditional and forever. And experience that in my presence. Let's strive during this Mass then, and every time we come into the presence of the Lord, to remember that we're right there with Mary. We're invited to experience Jesus' presence, to sit there at his feet, and to have a sense of the promise fulfilled. And that gives us the energy to go back to being Martha, to live that faith, and to share even in the sufferings of Christ, knowing that the promise is given to us to share also in his glory. God bless you.